Explore Denver's unique arts and culture scene. See Orcas, Our Shared Future, March 15th through September 2nd at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Relive the hits at MJ the Musical at the Buell Theater, April 10th through 28th. And enjoy ballet masterworks at the Elle Opera House, April 12th through 21st. Listos? Let's go! Start planning your arts-packed adventures at visitdenver.com/do more.
Hi, I'm Brittney Saunders and welcome to Big Business, the place where business is far from boring. And today I'm recording on Gadigal land. Now, I somehow managed to build an empire from my garage, and I'm here to share it all with you, from the wins, the huge mistakes, the challenging times, and the funny moments in between. Whether you're in business already, wanting to start, just looking for some inspiration, or just to hear the tea, this is the podcast for you. Coming up in today's episode, we are taking it back to the very beginning. Because believe it or not, my journey didn't start recently. It started quite literally in my primary school days. I feel like a lot of people will look at me now, see what I'm doing, see all these established businesses and think, wow, like she's got it all together. Maybe this was an overnight success, but the truth is, this goes back to my childhood. And once you've heard my story, you'll kind of understand and everything will make sense. Anyway, time is money, so let's get down to business. So 10 years ago, I was working in a 9-to-5 office job, and my boss at the time, he used to make fun of me for this silly little hobby that I had. It was one that I'd had since high school, and it was actually something that I was interested in since primary school. So it was something that I've been doing for a while. Now, looking back on my childhood, one thing that I loved was entertaining. I remember doing dance concerts for my family. I did dancing. I was that kid that did drama, and I was that kid that put their hand up for absolutely everything. You know, when the teacher would get to the front of the class and be like, all right, today we're doing reading. Who wants to read? I would be that kid putting my hand up, which I feel like a lot of people would shriek at because I feel like most people would avoid doing that. I was that kid that wanted to speak in front of the class. I wanted to be on the debating team. I wanted to be the school captain. I was just that kid that wanted to be the centre of attention, but in a good way, I think. Now, my first ever memory of wanting to be on camera was when my next door neighbours had a webcam on their bulky computer. You know, when you would have those bulky computers and then you'd have the round little webcam on top? My neighbours had one of those, and I remember at any opportunity I could get, I would go over to their house and open up, I think it was Windows Movie Maker at the time, and I would make little recordings of myself for no reason. This was before the internet was basically a thing, but I would love speaking on the camera and making these little at-home videos. And that's the first memory that I have of talking on camera. When I was in high school, this website came out that we all know as YouTube. And I remember jumping on there and seeing a few people that were making videos at the time. I think they might have even been called YouTubers at the time. This was before the word influencer was even a thing. This was before Instagram was a thing, or maybe Instagram was just starting out, but I think most of us at the time thought that Instagram was a photo filtering app when it first came out. But I remember seeing these YouTubers and thinking, wow, I could do something like that. So in my high school days, I started my own YouTube channel that was just a fun little hobby. That's where my journey began, when I made that silly little YouTube channel and my boss at the time would make fun of me for those videos that I was making. Now, I bet you're wondering what kind of videos was this teenager making? They were nothing special, and I was relentlessly bullied at school for those videos. And now that I look back, I'm kind of like, fair enough, because they were not good videos at all. But I never cared. I never cared. I kept going at it, even though it was mainly the boys in my school that would make fun of me, which now I'm like, oh, maybe they just thought I was a little bit cute. But these videos that I was making, I remember I went to Kmart and I purchased an eyeshadow palette by the brand BYS, and I did some makeup tutorials, even though I was no good at makeup. They were just videos of me telling stories about my life. It was me sitting alone in my bedroom making these videos and posting them to the internet for my own enjoyment. There was never any motive behind me making those videos, I was definitely making them for myself because I enjoyed the whole process. I love talking to the camera. I love spending the next few hours editing that video together and even waiting hours for it to upload to YouTube. It was really just a me thing that I loved doing. The fact that they were getting like 200 views probably from everyone at my school was just a bonus, I guess. And were they good views or was it just everyone watching to see what I was up to? Who knows? I don't know what year this was that I started doing this, but I want to emphasize the fact that there was no incentive for making these YouTube videos. I think YouTube videos began to be monetized around this time where advertisers were jumping on and putting ads on them. But for me especially, like this was before influencers. This was before brand deals. You weren't posting for the sake of earning some money or gaining an audience, really. I was really naive going into that, and I think that's one of the most special things about my journey is that it started off in this super organic way. I had no idea that by starting that silly little hobby, that one day I would go on to become one of Australia's first ever influencers. I amassed that YouTube channel to over 1 million subscribers, and I then off the back of that grew my Instagram to over 600,000 followers. I'd then later use those skills to launch an e-commerce fashion brand that would grow into an 8-figure empire. And I somehow managed to do all of this on my own, completely self-funded out of my own back pocket. I think a lot of people could look at me and what I'm doing now and maybe have a different idea in their mind. Not that I can speak for others, but maybe people see me and I'm this young blonde girl. Like, what is this girl doing? Has she gotten a handout off her family? Does she have wealthy parents? Does she come from money? I have never been given a cent. I've never gotten a loan. I don't have investors. I have done this whole thing on my own, and that's one thing that I'm really proud of and something that I preach, doing it yourself. Now, when it comes to social media, I think one of the most important things that I want everyone to understand is that success on social media doesn't happen overnight, especially not back when I started. It was a very slow burn. I feel like now you can see people rise to internet success overnight, but for me, my journey has been a long one, and I've been posting to social media for over 10 years with no breaks. I always make the joke that if long service leave was a thing in my industry, I would be well overdue. I'd be on long service leave right now, but here I am and I'm still going. Now, before we jump into the fun stuff, I've got to tell you a little bit about my history because funnily enough, everything I did in my teens gives so much context as to who I am now and essentially will explain to you why I am the way that I am. I remember when I was a teenager, and I think I was making those YouTube videos at this time, or it might have been after, but I remember I couldn't wait to get my first job. I did a few jobs when I was maybe 11 or 12 where I would deliver newspapers and those like promotional magazines in my suburb. I did it with like my stepbrother, but we gave up on that really quick because you had to roll them all up and put the elastic bands around them and it took forever. And it was heavy to carry that many papers around. We probably got paid $20 for it. But I remember in the lead up to turning 14 in 9 months, because I think that's how old you had to be to work at Macca's at the time, I counted down honestly, probably from 12 months prior to go and get that job at my local Macca's, which we lived around the corner from. And as soon as I was old enough, I sent through that online application and I was straight down at my local Macca's and I just couldn't wait to work. My family growing up, like we lived a pretty standard life, I'd say. Like we never had a lot of money, but we had a good life, I would say. But I was never like given money from my family and I just always couldn't wait to earn my own. So I was that kid working 5 or 6 nights a week at Macca's. And that was when Macca's wasn't 24 hours, so you'd like close it. And I remember like mopping the whole place and closing the door. I just wanted to earn money so badly. Other than that, I'd say we had a pretty normal family, but I did have a lot of issues with my dad in my earlier years. My parents divorced when I was around 9, and then we had a very on and off relationship. We'd have a lot of periods where we wouldn't talk for a really long time, and then I'd go back. It was like a bad relationship. And I think dealing with trauma from my dad and being abandoned by him or both of my parents, I hate throwing them under the bus even though it's part of my story. I still feel weird like talking about that online. But I think dealing with those issues with my parents in my early years definitely built me into who I am today. And it's why I have that really resilient personality and also a strong sense of independence. Now, I developed a habit in my teens of quitting a job when I knew I didn't like it anymore, even if it meant that I had done 2 shifts there. So I've written a few places that I worked here just to give you a bit of context. So my first official job was at Macca's. Then I went to Subway at the same time I was at the Macca's, so I was doing those 2 jobs. And then I got a 3rd job on top of that at my local Baskin-Robbins. And at one point there, I was juggling the 3 jobs because I just wanted to earn as much money as I could. I then moved on into waitressing. I still remember when I got my first waitressing job. I was 15. I was so nervous at the thought of having to carry 3 plates. But I've since learned that that's a skill. Once you have it, you'll never lose it. If you ever need me to carry 3 plates for you, just let me know. So I did various waitressing roles. When I turned 18, I got my RSA so I could serve alcohol and work in bars. I worked in sales. I worked in makeup. I worked at a shoe store. I worked in the fragrance department at Myer. I worked at a men's clothing store, and I remember I honestly worked there for like 3 weeks because my manager sat me down one day and said, "Why haven't you been upselling the ties with the shirts?" And I just couldn't get my head around the fact that why should I have to do that if the guy only wants a shirt? It doesn't make sense. So I quit there in a second. I did a stint of working at a school camp as a sports instructor. I honestly did it all. And the last jobs I found myself in were your typical 9 to 5 admin office roles. One was at a pest control company, booking in the terminations, and one was at a glass manufacturing company. And then my last ever job was working in an admin and recruitment style role. And I think that company ended up becoming an MLM and they got in trouble for something, but that's a story for another time. I dropped out of school in year 11, and that's when I jumped into doing all of those various roles. And I remember when I finally got my foot in the door working 9 to 5, I thought, surely this is it. After working all these jobs, I had over 20 jobs from the ages of 14 to 21. I thought, finally, now that I've got an official proper job where I'm going to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, this is it. Like, this is the dream, right? And I still remember driving to work most days, calling my mum and saying to her, this can't be it. Like, I was in disbelief at the fact that this was how I was going to live my life forever, just like on that repeat of going to work. And I know that's a thing that a lot of people feel, and that is the norm. Like, you're working to live or living to work. And I would call my mum on the way to work every day, almost in tears, saying, I can't do this. Like, it's like I knew inside of me that there was something more. I just didn't know what it was. And she would say, oh, this is a reality, Brittney. Welcome to the real world. Like, you know, because that was her reality and it is for most. And I get that. But I had this inkling feeling inside of me that there's something more for me out there. I didn't know what it was, but I wasn't going to stop until I found it. Did having over 20 jobs on my resume look good? No. But I lied and left things off and fudged the dates and made it look like I worked at places for way longer than I ever did and probably left half of the places off there. And when I was quitting all of these jobs, there was never a defining factor for each of them. I feel like it was always something different. Maybe it was the managers, maybe it was the work environment, maybe it was the people, maybe it was the physical work. All I knew is as soon as I didn't like that job, I was on to the next one. Now, the funny thing is, while I was working all these jobs and making my silly little YouTube videos, is that I had the entrepreneurial spirit. I think I was too young to realise that I had it, but looking back now, I definitely did. And there was a lot of things that I did that were telltale signs. I realised that I could use my Facebook account to essentially make money. Now, I'm from Newcastle, which is 2 hours north of Sydney. It's a little, to me, it's like a town, but it is a city, but it is regional. And I realised I've got 200 to 300 people on this account. That's 200 to 300 people that I could make money out of. So what did I do? My first stint at business was setting up a beauty business called Beauty and Tans by Brittney. Very original. I still remember my email address, beautybybrittney@hotmail.com. I still have that email address. I can still log into it. I would make up the most poor graphics on Microsoft Paint using stock images of Ireland with I'm going to be able to find them. I've still got them somewhere. I'll post them somewhere on the internet. I lived in a rental at the time and we had a brick dungeon looking thing under the back of our house because it was on a sloping block, and I set up this little room under there with my spray tan. I went and bought the professional gun, the hair nets, the paper G-strings, the little sticky feet thing. I bought it all and I set up this beauty salon underneath my house, and I was charging $15 for a full body spray tan. Double coat, doesn't matter. If you want triple coat, it's still $15. I feel like now there's so much more than that. I also was half good at makeup at the time, so I would charge $30 for a full face, including lashes. And I think I also did mobile as well, and it was only $10 more for me to come to you, even if it meant I had to drive half an hour. Much like my school days when I would put my hand up to do anything, I did the same during these years as well. A friend of a friend owned a hair salon at the time, and she wanted someone to run her social media. So I did that. I don't think I got paid anything, but I just posted to their Facebook and Instagram. And another thing that I did back in the day, which is really embarrassing, I've got some great photos that I can share as well, was I went through a stage of decorating iPhone cases. I purchased off eBay some plain iPhone cases. I went down to my local Spotlight. I bought some pearls, some gems, some ribbons, some lace, and I sat there at my dining room table decorating these iPhone cases. And I put them on my Facebook and said, for sale. I'm pretty sure I was selling them at $5 each. And guess how many I sold? None. But it didn't matter because what mattered was what I was doing. So after working a billion jobs, it wasn't a billion, it was 20-something, through high school and into my early 20s, all the while trying all these little different business ventures that I didn't know were business ventures at the time. They were just fun little hobbies for me. So after working a billion jobs, all it took was for my boss to make that joke to me one more time, and I did it. I quit my full-time job at 21. And for context, he was never mean about it, but it was always a joke. He would say, oh, why don't you just make these videos full-time? Ha, ha, ha. And this was barely a thing back then. And he just kept making those jokes, and one day I just said, fuck it. I remember when I quit my job at that time, and I told my mum, and she thought I was crazy. But in my mind, I'd worked a billion jobs by this point. I thought, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm just going to have to go and get another job. I was so used to doing that already. I was a professional job getter. So that was the worst thing that was going to happen. So I thought, why not give this a crack? Let's do this and make this YouTube thing work for me. I'm going to make making YouTube videos my full-time job. So 21 years old. I'm living in a share house. I've quit my full-time job, and at the time I had 80,000 YouTube subscribers, which today probably isn't all that much, but back then that was kind of a big deal. I had a bit of a fan base going, and at this point I sat down and worked out all of my expenses. I had petrol to put in my car. I was probably paying off a phone plan. I had to buy groceries. I looked at it all, and I looked at what I was earning on YouTube, and I thought, I think I can make this work. I'm going to have just enough money to get by. And for context of how I was earning money, I was earning money from my YouTube ads that would play at the start of the video, at the end, annoyingly halfway through the middle. And it was at this point as well that we started to see the rise of the word influencer in Australia. So brands were jumping onto people like me and paying people like me to promote their products in their YouTube videos. This was when all of the branded stuff started to happen, which was so cool to experience. And what's crazy is this was 10 years ago now. So I was 21, I'm 31 now, about to turn 31. So this was 2014. So how exactly was I going to make this work? How was I going to grow this YouTube channel beyond 80,000 followers? There's only one word for it: consistency. I think consistency is absolutely everything, not just for YouTube and social media, but your life in general, and especially in business. I got straight down to business and I implemented a upload schedule. I was uploading 3 videos a week at one point, then it went to 4, and then it went to 5. My followers knew that they could expect those 4 or 5 videos from me every single week. I never missed it. It was so specific that there were certain days and times that they would know that I was going to upload. It was also during this time that Instagram turned from a photo filtering app into an actual social media app. So then I was flogging the shit out of my Instagram account to those YouTube followers at the end of every single YouTube video saying, make sure you like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Let me know what video you want to see next, and make sure you follow me on this cool app called Instagram. I made sure that I was consistently telling people to follow me on this other platform. I then spent the next 3 years from 2014 onwards growing that YouTube channel from 80,000 to over 1 million. And it took that long. It wasn't overnight. It was 3 years of consistency. Now, the 3 biggest lessons that I learned from YouTube that I would then later take into my business journey is this. Number 1, being consistent on social media is everything. That applied to me back then and it applies to me today. You can't be inconsistent when it comes to social media. There's absolutely no point of doing it if you're not going to be consistent with it. And I know that's a hard thing to say because people think social media is so hard, creating content and always being active, but take it from me. Being consistent is absolutely everything. It's something that you need to prioritize. Number 2, the best way to build an audience online is by genuinely being yourself. It's all I've ever done. And again, take it from me. It's all I've ever done. Sure, there's other ways like living a fake life online or pretending to have some sort of aesthetic, but I feel like if you want longevity out of your social media and you really want to build something out of it, the best way to do it is by showing up as yourself. The last thing that I learned from being a full-time YouTuber is fuck what anyone else thinks. Can you imagine if I ever gave a fuck about what anyone thought? I would not be sitting here recording this podcast today. I quite literally would not be here. Now let's move on to what I'm more known for today, which is my business and my baby, Fate. By this point in the episode, you know a bit about me, the way that I was and the things that I tried before stepping into the world of Fate. And I'll be completely honest with you, Fate was never this big idea. If people looked at Fate now, they'd think, wow, it's a big business, isn't it? And hand on my heart, that was never a thought in my mind, which might be weird to believe. When I started Fate, it was much another one of those little things that I thought I'd try. Much like the YouTube videos, much like the spray tans, much like the makeovers, much like running other people's Instagram accounts, and much like my beautiful iPhone cases. Starting Fate was just another one of those ideas. I loved trying new things. The only big difference with Fate was I was launching it into a decent sized audience. I no longer had my 200 to 300 friends on Facebook. I had an audience of over 1 million. Now, some people have said to me over the years, oh, what an advantage. That makes it so much easier that you had over 1 million subscribers on YouTube and you could just launch your audience into that. And you know what I say to that? I agree. You're totally right. I 100% had such an upper hand launching my silly little idea into an audience of over 1 million. Anyone is 10 steps ahead if you're launching into an existing audience. So I 100% agree with that. But what a lot of people fail to realize is just because someone has all of these followers, it doesn't mean they know how to run a business day to day. It certainly doesn't mean they know how to sustain a business and keep it going for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. And it certainly doesn't mean that you know how to scale a business and make it grow. Just because someone has a load of followers, it also doesn't mean that their audience is naturally going to go over and purchase, or they may once and it may be a flop, which may lead to audience disappointment. There's so many factors to consider when someone has a big audience when it comes to starting a business. And as for me, I was completely clueless when it came to all of that. All I understood was social media. I had not a single clue how to actually run a business and get it started. All I had was the eagerness to learn and a whole lot of common sense. So, like a lot of great businesses, I started Fate from the garage underneath my townhouse rental at the time. And what's really cool is I was with my partner AJ at the time, and he's been there since the very beginning, and he now works with me. So I feel like we'll get to that in a future episode. So we were living in our townhouse. I told AJ he was losing his park in our double garage because one side was going to be for Fate, and I had to learn everything myself. And I remember how excited I was. One Saturday, I said to AJ, let's go down to Bunnings. I'm going to need plastic tubs for my clothes. We went down to our local Bunnings, and I remember saying to AJ, how many plastic tubs do you think we're going to need? And I think we ended up getting 12 or something so I could line them up on the ground and put our stock in it. I then Googled the shit out of how to learn everything else. How on earth do I set up a domain, which is your website, your www. I had to learn that. I learned how to build a website on Shopify. That's the platform I use, and it's a great e-commerce platform that most e-commerce owners use. I remember Googling how to ship parcels in Australia, and I had to set up an account with Australia Post. I'd obviously understood social media by this point, so I felt like I didn't need to learn too much there, but I still had to come up with a bit of a plan. I was creating all of our content for our social media, doing our photo shoots locally in Newcastle. I was scouting local models that I knew, aka friends and friends of friends. I was doing our inventory planning, our customer service emails, our returns. I would go and pick them up from the PO box and process them myself. I was packing all of our orders and doing all of our photography for our social media and our website. I was doing it all on my own from the very beginning, and I feel as if though starting a business that way is one of the best ways that you can start it. Sure, it would be great to have a business already be established for you and have all your employees and all the processes set in place, but there's something really special about doing all that groundwork yourself from the beginning. I don't know what it is, but I'm just really glad that I got to start my business that way in the garage under my house. I also hired my very first casual employee in that garage, and we ran the whole thing out of there. Now, one thing that I did in this part of my journey was that I hid it from social media. I would go as far as saying I lied to make it look like that wasn't the way things are. People knew that I owned this brand called Fate, and I would show all of our fun moments when we were going to do a photo shoot down at the beach or wherever we were going. But when it came to the behind the scenes of my business, I never showed that on my social media. All I have is just a few photos that are still in the top of my camera roll from me packing orders in the warehouse, in the garage. Why did I not share this on social media? I was worried about what people would think, which goes completely against everything that I stood for back then and what I stand for now. I was worried that people wouldn't take me seriously if they knew that I was packing orders. And if I could have my time over again, especially with how different the internet is now, I would share that entire part of my business journey with my audience, because I feel like that's such a popular thing to do now, is to share that start of your journey. Instead, I hid it. I'd have to say it's like one of my only regrets in my business journey. And whilst that's a thing of the past and it's long gone and it's something that I can't undo, I guess that's why I'm excited for this podcast, because I am going to be able to share all of those early learnings and lessons with you. So whilst I don't have the video content or evidence of everything that I did back then, all I've got is a few photos. I can at least reflect on those memories and share them with you. After 6 or so months in the garage, it was scarily time to move into our first ever warehouse. And I guess this was where I started learning more about risk taking. I'd already taken a few risks by this point. I'd quit my full-time job, I'd pursued making YouTube videos as a career, and I'd launched Fate. I knew what it was like to take risks, but this one felt more real, or it felt official. I remember jumping online and I found a 90 square metre storage shed that we would call home for Fate. The rent was $30,000 and something a year, which at the time was huge for me. I remember having these thoughts to myself, what if I don't make enough money to be able to pay that? How was I going to manage paying that plus the rent for my townhouse that I was living in with AJ? But inside of me, it was a risk that I knew that I had to take. So I signed a 12-month lease and moved straight in. And if there's one thing that I've learned from my business journey, it's those really scary things that you almost feel like you shouldn't do, that you need to do, because that's when the next chapter opens. If I had stayed in my garage, and I very well could have, nothing would have progressed, nothing would have moved forward. So keep in mind when you're wanting to do something in your business journey or in your life and it's scaring the shit out of you, I feel like, not that I'm one of those people, but I feel like that's the universe telling you that you need to do it. It was then at this warehouse that I would hire a couple of other casual employees, as well as eventually my first full-time employee. And when it comes to hiring, I feel like that's a whole other episode, or maybe 10 other episodes. We can get into that. I'm just trying to give you the brief overall view of my life in this episode. It was then when I moved into this warehouse that I felt confident showcasing this part of my business journey online. So I started making YouTube videos of me at work, day in the lifestyle, showing what I got up to at work. We were absolutely doing everything wrong. We were doing nothing right. And at the same time, this was also the period in my life where I was finding I didn't have as much time to make those YouTube videos as regularly as I was in the past. And I definitely went through a phase where my comments were being flooded with, why don't you make YouTube videos as much anymore? And now within that 12-month lease, to my absolute surprise, we outgrew that 90 square metre warehouse. It was at around the 6 to 8 month mark that I could sense that we were needing a bigger space. Again, the same way that I felt when I could feel we needed to move out of the garage. So once again, I began that journey of looking for a new commercial property. And little did I know that by doing this, it would then lead me into almost accidentally opening a retail store, and it would change everything forever. This would have been in either late 2018 or early 2019. I remember sitting on the lounge scrolling through commercialrealestate.com.au, which is a website I've become quite familiar with over the years. And I stumbled upon this one particular building that immediately caught my eye. You know when you see something, you just fall in love with it? That was me when I saw this building. This wasn't just a warehouse. It was an entire 500 square metre building. Now, what was the reason I loved it so much? The office. The entire upstairs level was an open plan space with wooden floorboards, exposed brick walls, and a high ceiling with beautiful track lighting. It kind of reminded me of one of those New York loft apartments that you see. It had a generously sized warehouse style space on one half of the ground floor, but there was 2 catches with this listing. Firstly, the rent. It was over $100,000 a year, which was astronomical compared to the $30,000 I was paying at the time. I remember sending the link to one of my good friends, Wade, and saying to him, wow, look at this. I remember sending it to him as if I was absolutely dreaming that I could ever afford or work from a place like that. The second catch, there was a showroom on the other half of the ground floor. I had basically 2.5 employees at this time, and most of them were friends or family, which is a whole other topic for another episode. This building was simply way too big for us. We simply didn't need that much space. I remember one day my partner AJ and I were in the area and I hadn't stopped thinking about the space. I kept going back to that listing and looking at the photos every night. So one day we drove by, we jumped out the car and pressed our faces against the front window. I remember AJ saying to me, what on earth would you do with this space downstairs? It's way too big. And I said to him, oh, well, I could open a shop. I remember AJ shaking his head at the thought, and I don't know if I wanted to prove a point to him or if I just really wanted the office, but I signed a 3-year lease and opened the next chapter of not only my business journey, but my life. I remember when it was time to move, we shut down our website for 2 or so days and we made the move into our new warehouse space, prioritising the warehouse and office being set up so we could get straight back into business. After we were all settled in, we then spent the next 5 to 6 months DIYing our store setup. And again, like all things, I documented this process, mainly on Instagram, as at this stage, YouTube was becoming a thing of the past for me. I remember Googling everything about setting up a store in the lead up. How to have a point of sale system, like where to buy shopping bags. I had no idea how to hire casuals for your store. I've Googled everything. People always ask, how do you know everything that you know? I've Googled everything. I swear I still Google 100 things a day. In December, in December 2019, leave the bloopers in. In December of 2019, which first of all, who opens a store in December? Like the craziest month of the year. I had no idea what I was doing, but we were finally ready to open our doors. And this was when the imposter syndrome kicked in. What if no one shows up? What if people come for the first couple of weeks and then they get over it and they never come back again? What if my business fails and I'm stuck in a 3-year lease and I can't pay the $100,000 a year for rent? If there's one thing I've learned in my business journey, it's that these kinds of thoughts actually never go away. If anything, I think the more successful you become, the bigger those thoughts get. I opened the doors to that store in December of 2019, and little did I know that after that, I would go on to open 3 more across the east coast of Australia over the following years. And I truly think that if I never found that building because we needed a bigger workspace, I never would have opened any of our stores. And if that's not fate, I don't know what is. A A lot has happened in between opening that store in 2019 and now. I've learnt so many valuable lessons during that process and a million more in the lead up to today. And one thing that I love about business is that during that time, I've also learnt so much about myself. And that's one thing I never thought entering business is that, sure, you're doing business, but you're doing a lot of work on yourself as well. I now have almost 60 employees, 4 physical retail stores. We moved into a huge warehouse after the one that was connected to our Newcastle store, and within 2 years we outgrew that and we're about to move into another new one that is over 1,000 square metres. And the crazy thing with that is I was so scared to pay that $30,000 a year, and now I'm out here spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on rent across all different areas of my business. Now, as you can imagine, I have learnt a lot of lessons over the last few years and have experienced a lot. And that's why I'm so excited to be launching this podcast, Big Business into the World. Talking about business is my absolute passion, and I hope that my upcoming episodes will give you an insight into my story and all of the lessons I've learnt along the way. From working with family to changing people's lives, to hiring friends and losing them along the way. From spending $500,000 to fit out one store and making that investment back in the first week of opening, and learning that taking a chance can change your life. I hope this episode has left you feeling inspired, and guess what? This is only the beginning. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to my first ever episode of Big Business, and I'm going to be leaving you with a tip of the week, which is a theme that I want to continue through every episode. Now, this week's tip is a quote that I live my life by, and I'm going to dive deeper into it in a future episode, but I'm going to leave you with this. Hard conversations, easy life. Easy conversations, hard life. Just let that sink in. And a bit of housekeeping for the first episode. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. I upload episodes every Monday. And if you have a spare 5 seconds, please feel free to rate my podcast 5 stars and leave me a review. And be sure to follow me everywhere else. You can just look up my name, Brittney Saunders. And if you're in the mood, feel free to place an order on fatethelabel.com. And until next time, chase after your dreams as if they owe you money.